In this tutorial, we'll keep going on with the button versus cutoff single raise pots, looking more at the 4-span high boards. In the previous tutorial, we looked at some flop, an overview of the flop bet sizing and some of the turn sizes. But now we'll dig a bit deeper into the turn play and river play after, let's say, it goes bet on the flop and then call for either of the two players. So there's going to be two situations which we're going to want to look at. The first one is when the cutoff bets and then the button calls and then how we play the turn. And the second one is when the cutoff checks, the button bets, and then the cutoff calls, and then playing the turn. So we'll look at a few examples of each of these today. So let's pick a flop. Let's go straight for the flop with the most equity for the cutoff. This King Queen 7. Naturally, this King Queen 7 has a lot of equity for the cutoff because the cutoff has a lot of offsuit Broadway type hands in their pre-flop opening range, as well as these suited kind of junk King X and junk Queen X hands before the flop, which hit the King and the Queen reasonably well, and all of the suited 7X, which hits that 7 well as well, compared to the button, which doesn't really have quite as many of those types of hands, doesn't really hit the King and the Queen as strongly. So looking at the flop strategy, the cutoff here is betting a quarter of the pot and half the pot. A quarter of the pot being bet almost 60% of the time. Let's have a look at the flop response to that small bet. Here, this is a pot size raise. I've given it a pot and a half size raise as well. So there's a variety of different raise sizes that the button can use against this small bet. But the pot size raise is being used, and then that raise size is this set of 7s, King Queen for value, and then throwing in a little bit of weaker top pairs and other kinds of pairs as semi bluffs to play the and give good coverage on the different turns. But what we're interested in now is mainly the turn play after it goes bet call. So let's have a look at the turn report, and looking at the overall picture here. For the cutoff, player 1, we've got the cutoff checking on average 37.74% of the time after it goes bet call. And then you've got bet sizes of quarter pot being bet 25% of the time, half pot being bet about 21% of the time, and then the pot size bet about 13% of the time. And then there's a little bit of overbetting on certain board types, but not a huge amount. We can look a little bit more deeply into these kinds of examples where we're overbetting the turn. So the board, the turn cards which the cutoff is overbetting after it goes bet call, mainly the 7 and then this ace, right? So here the 7, after it goes bet call on the flop, right, there's not a lot of just 7x in the button's calling range. And it's because there's not a lot of 7x in buttons calling range pre-flop, right? So when the 7 comes in, say for example we've got the 7 of hearts, the cutoff has a lot of 3 of a kinds now, right? A lot of trips has been made from the appearance of this 2nd to 7, and a lot of the pocket pairs which the button has floated on the flop have now just missed, right? So there's a bit of a double whammy there. The button's calling range is basically missed, right? It hasn't produced any additional sets for the button, and the 7 has produced some more trips for the cutoff. So I've got a variety of sizes here. Twice pot, this twice pot bet happening pretty often, and it's mainly these trips for value. Of course, there's a bit of overpair and some top pair and 2 pair and top pairs being thrown in there as well. But it's fairly trip heavy. Moving down from the twice pot bet to the pot size bet, much fewer trips and stronger hands. There are some sets of the set of kings, and the reason why there's a lot of set of kings in this particular range is because a lot of the top pairs are being put into this size. So a lot of the decent top pairs, the King X that after it goes bet call being put into the size, and so the set of kings works well in that particular range. Other Other sizes, I mean, this high pot size isn't being used too often because it doesn't make too much sense with any of the hand types. But definitely this quarter pot size being a bit of a block with the Queen X type hands, second pairs, and some of the weaker pairs as well, right? That particular block size, right, aiming to get a little bit of value from the underpairs in the buttons range. Remember, the button is fairly pocket pair heavy before the flop, and so a lot of those pocket pairs will now call the turn. Looking at the density of the weak pairs, that's meaning pocket jacks or weaker. That's about 41.5% of the range, right? So given that there's so much of the range that the button can call with, in terms of weaker than a queen, betting small to get called, get a little bit of value from those hands, and trying to deny equity from those particular sets, preventing them from checking back, is the way to do it. Notice here that after the 7 comes, if the cutoff is to check, that the button is checking back a substantial amount. A lot of these pocket pairs just checking back, right? There's not a lot of point in betting them. That they're fairly middling now, trying to get the showdown with those pocket pairs against your ace high and weaker pocket pairs here, 8s through to 5s, for example. And even for like these bigger sizes, that the cutoff is turning these lower pocket pairs into bluffs, right? Trying to bluff your opponent off a bigger pocket pair, or a Queen X type hand at this stage. So say for example, you got twice pot bet, call, river's a brick. I mean, the hand kind of plays itself from there. The stack is 78 on the river and pot's 45, so you just rip twice the pot. When you've got your trips and your aces here. The reason why this aces works so well is because here on ace king queen 7-7, your hand is actually ace 7-7, which beats king queen. So you can get value from your opponent's king queen, which will basically always snap you off. So just remember the hand rankings and how they'll play out. So when you've got aces there, it's a pretty easy jam for value. Your opponent's going to snap you off with king queen basically all the time. All right. And then there's like some smaller sizes as pot size bet with the king queen and the ace king. If it gets jammed on, then the king queen is always calling, and then ace king is the indifferent hand. Look at the pot size bet. Similar kind of things are going to go on, but here this pot size bet is a lot more king X heavy. You get a call for a brick, and then like that king X is going to pot it again on the river, or like go for this half pot size. There is still a little bit of jamming with some of these hands, like aces, as I said before, right? It's already going to run into quad sevens and like ace 7, but it's just getting snapped off by king queens. That's why like aces in this particular run out just works really well as is just massive overbet jam, because the hands that your opponent wants to call with basically will just never be able to block it. And just looking at a little bit of some other type of strong hands in there as well will force your opponent to worse call with king queen. It's difficult for your opponent to justify folding king queen against this overbet all in. Okay, so that's for the 7 and with some of the other bets. But in terms of like the other kinds of ranks, there's a variety of other bet sizes being used. Say for example we get the 9, right? So here the 9 brings in the jack 10. So the sizing is going to be a bit smaller because you're somewhat afraid of either player having a straight. Both players can have jack 10 suited, but the cutoff also has jack 10 offsuit, but the density of jack 10 offsuit is going to be roughly the same as the density of jack 10 suited in the buttons range, probably a little bit more. So there's a little bit more straight here for the cutoff, and so the cutoff's bluffing range on the flop has definitely improved, with jack 10 improving to the nut straight, and some of these 9x improving to a pair, stuff like king 9, queen 9 improving to 2 pair. And now, because those bluffs are improved and your opponent's still like very underpair heavy, underpair to the queen, you're usually going to be wanting to to bet small with a wide range to deny equity from those under pairs and get some value, and then you can size up later on. And of course, if your opponent raises you, you should have plenty of hands to defend with, even though you're betting a fairly wide range here on the turn. The call river, and you've got the variety of different bet sizes. You've got this pot size bet going into the river with you know, these top pairs, over pairs, two pairs, etc. And a variety of other bet sizes, even going down to this quarter pot size with a queen, and some of the weaker top pairs going for half pot. So kind of putting your hands roughly into the betting the strengths of your hand. You can do that out of position when the ranges are wide like this. You can get away with roughly betting the strength of your hand, as long as you have some strong hands in that particular range to defend it from getting raised. So here, for example, with the Queen X range, betting this quarter pot, just chucking in your set of queens into that size works really well, because if your opponent's got a king, they'll want to raise you, and you just 3-bet them. So you just 3-bet all in there. All right, and don't get too scared of the fact that people are going to have straights. I mean, that's going to happen, but here, like the cutoff's got it 5% of the time after these two small bets, and the button very rarely has it after they just called it the turn, because that straight should have raised here. But here, even like when it goes bet call, like a lot of the straight on the flop, a lot of straight draw, the jack 10 on the flop will have raised. A lot of jack 10 pre-flop will have 3-bet, and then when it gets made on the turn, all that raises. So don't get too scared of your opponent having a straight after you go bet for these small sizes, because like that straight should raise if it wants to get enough value. Otherwise it's not getting enough value, because you're not stacking off light enough in these small lines, because your opponent's range is too strong. Half pot bet, I mean, it's the same kind of deal, right? Variety of different sizes you can use, and like a lot of these top pairs is going for this bet quarter pot, bet half pot, bet half pot here on the river, keeping the range kind of together, like trying to get called by your opponent's bluff catchers that are weaker than top pair. Sure, your opponent's top pair is stronger, and you'll get a bit cooler in terms of getting out kicked, but that's just a reality of the game. You're trying to get value from the worst hands, while also preventing your opponent from betting into you after you check, right? Okay, let's look at a different flop. And for example, this ace queen 9. Ace queen 9, the button's going to have a fair amount of ace queen offsuit. No ace queen suited, because all of that should have 3-bet pre-flop. You got this big pot size bet here on the flop after a check to them. So it depends exactly on what the flop strategy is going to be before you can figure out what the turn strategy is, right? So here in this ace queen 9, because the presence of the ace and the queen usually forms fairly polar ranges. A lot of middling hands in terms of ace X beating queen X, and a lot of queen X in the cutoffs range. Here the button's going to want to bet fairly big, and so they're making this pot size bet, and then that pot size bet is all this stronger top pairs, and two pairs with the ace queen, as well as the set of nines. So pot size bet there, call, and then we can look at the turn report. There's a little bit of donking for the out of position player, definitely a nine and a queen, because suddenly, like, all of the 9x that called the flop, all the queen x that called the flop has now made trips, and so you want to bet small to try to prevent your opponent from checking back, and so you can deny equity from your opponent's check backs, which can still outdraw your hand sometimes. Particularly those pocket pairs that turn themselves into a bluff, even though it's a small bet. On the turn, they have difficulty calling. All right, and then after it goes check, because the range is very polar to begin with, you look at the average. You can look at the average bet sizes here. Like here, after it goes bet call on the flop, and then the cutoff checks, the button's checking back around 52% on average, but the bet sizes are mainly for these bigger bet sizes. So here you've got the the pot size bet happening 33% of the time, the half pot bet happening 14.71% of the time. Not too much 2x pot bet, because after you pot the flop, it's a little bit too big on the turn. It's a bit more than geometric, so you don't really have to do that. But definitely making a spot size bet on the flop and then potting the turn, because your range on the flop is fairly polar, and your opponent, even though your opponent doesn't raise you very much, because your range is polar to set up with, you're going to make this second pot size bet, and then if it goes like brick, you're just going to jam the river with your value range, which is here for the bet all in size is the sets and the 2 pairs. We can look at a slightly different board, one that favors the button a little bit more. A6-3. After the check, I think we discussed in the last video the presence of the 2 sizes on the flop, but this small size on the flop with a lot of the weaker top pairs and other pocket pairs just deny equity from all the air that's in the cutoff's range, right? Like look at the amount of just junky air type hands which just have to fold to this very small bet. Remember, alpha for a quarter pot bet is 20%, so if they're folding 35% of the time, you get some benefits there. Of course, if you check back the flop and then your opponent has to check the turn a lot, just because their hands on average are just so weak, right? So your opponent just has to get the showdown with nothing in order to justify this overfolding here on the flop, right? So it's not like this bet is auto profiting. It's because the bluffs that you're using, the bluff candidates that you're using, can profitably bluff on a later street if you decide to check back. So bet, call, and then we can look at the turn report again. There's going to be a little bit of donking on the certain turn cards. The 6 and the aces are the main one, right? Because after that small bet, a lot of the 6x calls, all the ace-x calls. So when there's a 6 or an ace on the turn, it's really just going to swing the equities towards the cutoff. But on the remaining turn cards, the cutoff will check, and then the button here checks back about 65% on average. But depending on what the turn cards are, there's a bigger betting than the previous example that we looked at. So here you got pot size bet 11.56, and then twice pot bet at 22.53. So with these bigger bets, right, this is because of the sack to pot ratio on the turn, and the fact that your opponent has sort of capped himself from just calling a quarter pot bet on the flop. Remember, the quarter pot bet with a fairly wide range, you should be raising that that a lot of the time. So it's difficult for your opponent to represent a set on the turn after they just call this flop, this small bet on the flop, just because the set of 6s, the set of 3s, right? So these 2 sets should have gone for the check raise on the flop a lot of the time. So say for example we see a 10, right, checks, and now you got this twice pot bet happening all the time. And the range which bets twice the pot is mainly those 2 sets at the bottom. I mean, if you've got a little bit of the sets at the top in terms of turning that set of 10s, but the set of 10s, because the other 10x, you can check back the set of 10s to kind of protect that 10x and just like raise your opponent's bet into you on the river. But definitely the 2 bottom sets that go for this quarter pot bet on the flop should just kind of reveal the strength of their hand and go for the twice pot bet. Of course, not revealing a huge amount of information about the hand, because you've also got plenty of bluffs in this line, and the kinds of bluffs that you need to be using here in the button after you call is these pocket pairs. It's very important in the button on a lot of these boards to turn pocket pairs into bluffs, right? Like you just play a pocket pair like a good bluff candidate, because it's really the only thing in your range that can outdraw the top pair. Because you don't have a huge amount of like gut shots and stuff. So here you got your king, queen, king, jack, right? Turning those gut shots on the making a gut shot straight draw on the turn, right? So you need 2 cards to outdraw top pair. But when you've got a pocket pair, you can just bink a set by turning your hands into a bluff at some stage, and then like making that set and then jamming the river. Not the best bluff candidates, but because of the way the ranges are set up pre-flop and how those ranges hit the different flops, you need to be able to be turning these hands into bluffs. Otherwise, you're going to put yourself at a huge disadvantage. So here, alongside the set of 3s and the set of 6s, you got pocket 2s being turned into a bluff, pocket 4s being turned into a bluff, and also, I mean, here this is a gut shot, the 9-8. at 7, those hands are gut shots. But turning the suited connectors that hit one of these ranks into a bluff as well as a 5-out bluff, drawing a 2-pair or better. So here, like 6-5, with its currently it's just a pair of 6s, but if you bet twice the pot, like that pair of 6s doesn't really show down very well. And instead you've got a 5-out draw drawing to the 6s up in terms of pair of 6s, pair of 5s, 2-pair, or trip 6s if a 6 comes, and you've got 5-outs to do that. So and also the fact that it blocks your opponent's set, that's a bit of a nice thing because sometimes your opponent should have that set, not super often. It blocks other types of hands like the ace-6, which is a 2-pair. So you can use that kind of hand as a bluff for this 5-spot bet here on the turn. That's for a 10. Say for example, like the 7 comes. The 7 doesn't really change anything. Like sure, it brings 4-5, but like a lot of 4-5 would have raised the flop, and so and there's not much 4-5 in the calling range for the buttons, so it doesn't really change too much. It's fairly dry. And so you're playing it the kind of a similar way. You got the set of 7s, set of 6s, set of 3s, and all these pocket pairs just being thrown around there. The difference is here on the 7 is like these pocket pairs are also gut shots as well. So make sure that when you see that you've got a pocket pair that is also a gut shot, like it becomes a really nice bluff. A lot of the other unpaired hands, because their draw is so weak, it's difficult to outdraw top pair, and because you want to be betting very big, you actually want hands that will outdraw top pair. So when you've got these weak hands here, these just random high card hands, you should just be checking them back a lot, hoping to make a pair and then showing down against your opponent's pocket pairs that just called this small bet on the flop. And then the bluffs that you choose should be stuff that beats the ace, right? You shouldn't just be randomly airballing like king queen here because like it just doesn't outdraw anything that your opponent calls with. Right, if you make this pot size bet, your opponent's calling with a lot of top pair. So then like what happens when you make a queen, like look at this king queen is probably queen club is not the best example. Like this king queen here has to turn itself into a bluff again on the river, just because it hasn't been able to show down, right? On the other hand, like if you check back those sort of king queens and you make a queen and your opponent checks to you, you can check and win at showdown, or against a small bet you can call and then win at showdown sometimes. So yeah, just watch the bluff candidates that you're using in this spot, because it's fairly easy to default with these pocket pairs to just like try check back and show down. But in this particular example, like these are the only hands that have any kind of equity against the calling range, and so you want to be using them as your bluffs. All right, so that's a bit of an overview of the turn and river play on these 4-span high boards. In the next tutorial, we'll be looking at the 4-span low boards, so there'll be potentially a few more straight draws and some different considerations with the number of sets and the number of pairs in both players' ranges, because there'll be between like 7 high and queen high boards without too many straight draws. So hope you guys enjoyed the tutorial, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye now.